Welcome, everyone, to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. Today's episode is on stages and pages. My name is Philip Nguyen, and you've been listening to some smooth mixins with our in-house DJ Puzzle. How you doing, Puzzle? It's been a minute.
It's been good. What's cracking with you, Philip?
Feels good. That was a dope mix. And if you didn't know, now you know. You can catch all of DJ Puzzle's mixes on the Mixcloud. We're gonna drop the link in the chat here for you. And if you haven't already, drop in the chat. Let us know where you're calling from. We've got an extra diasporics show tonight as we talk about storytelling in both Singapore and France. And so we definitely want to hear where you're from, what you're enjoying for dinner or breakfast or lunch today. But again, welcome to Accented. Tonight, we have the honor of speaking with Vietnamese French playwright Olivier Dhénin and Singaporean writer Amanda Lee Koe. This is our 44th episode. Again, my name is Philip Nguyen. I'm one of the co-MCs, moderators, hosts for Accented, which is a project of the DVAN, or the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. To learn more about DVAN, you can visit dvan.org. Our mission is to foster diasporic Vietnamese and Southeast Asian literary voices. We empower artists in the diaspora and champion our complex and diverse stories. We are refugees, immigrants, survivors, and their descendants, and know that our stories must be heard. And if you like what you're hearing, please consider donating to support the show. You can do so by visiting dvan.org/donate, or by clicking the link at the bottom of this episode's description. We'll also drop it in the chat. And of course, this show wouldn't be possible without folks like y'all joining us to listen in and watch here on Zoom, as well as our sponsor, AppLovin. AppLovin's leading marketing platform provides developers a powerful set of solutions to grow their mobile apps. AppLovin's technology platform enables developers to market, monetize, analyze, and publish their apps. The company's first-party content includes over 200 popular, engaging apps, and its technology brings that content to millions of users around the world. They're headquartered in Palo Alto, California, with several offices globally, and y'all can learn more at applovin.com. As we make our way through the show, at the end of the show, we'll also have a survey that we will ask you to fill out so that we can perhaps get more funding to do more episodes of the show. We're doing 44 and counting. Hopefully, we can bring it into a live studio theater with an audience one day. So we're really excited for y'all's support. And if you didn't know, Accented, the virtual Zoom show, is also a podcast that you can listen to on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Drop a listen in on your commute, and then leave us a rating/review so we can spread the love across the diaspora. And now that we've got the introduction settled away, I have the honor of introducing my co-host for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, Mr. Viet Thanh Nguyen, whose novel The Sympathizer won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. His most recent works are Simone, a children's book illustrated by Minnie Fan, and A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, a history, a memorial. He is also the editor of The Displaced, Refugee Writers on Refugee Lives, and one of the co-founders of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. Welcome back, Viet.
Hey, Philip, so good to be back here with you and DJ Puzzle. I'm really excited for our show today. We have guests coming in or calling in from Singapore and from France or France. I've had the pleasure of being in both of those places, so it's really great that we have this kind of Southeast Asian diasporic representation in these countries. Our first guest is Amanda Lee Koe, who was born and raised in Singapore. Her debut novel, Delayed Rays of a Star, was published by Doubleday in 2019, and it was one of NPR's best books of the year. Her most recent book, Sister Snake, was published by Ecco in 2024, and it was one of Kirkus Review's best fiction books of the year. Hello, Amanda.
Hello. Hi. Thanks so much, Viet and Philip. So nice to join you here from Singapore where it's 10 in the morning. So you guys are thinking about dinner, but I'm just like only thinking about breakfast. So
Well, it's probably also a lot warmer and humid in Singapore, from what I remember. And that is
exactement.
exactamo, and that's not true for Rochefort in France on the Atlantic coast, where Olivier Dhénin is calling from. He is a poet, playwright, and director. He was artistic coordinator of the Théâtre du Châtelet and the National Drama Center of Bretagne. Olivier was resident at the Villa Medici, Académie de France in Rome, and laureate of the French Institute Villa Saigon in 2023, and we'll be talking to him about his experiences there in Saigon. Hello, Olivier.
Hello, Viet. Hello, Philippe. Hello, Amanda. Nice to meet you.
What time is it in Rochefort, Olivier?
It's 3 o'clock in the morning, so it's very early. It's in the middle of the night.
I know. I'm always so thrilled when we have European guests, but unfortunately for them, it's always at this terrible, terrible time. You both have these very interesting backgrounds, and you're coming to us from very different places, obviously, in Singapore and in France. And I thought I would start off just orienting our audience, who are also from all over the world as well, by asking you if you can tell us about where you grew up and what it was like for you. And we'll start off with Amanda.
Well, I was born and raised in Singapore. I split my time between New York and Singapore now, but I guess like being born and raised in Singapore was I mean, let's go down into the specificities of it as well, because like I guess like my first sort of like educational experience was like in a Catholic convent primary school. And I also think it's super fascinating how sort of like religion and sort of like educational institutions and how like sort of they intersect are often also a point of bonding for us like diasporic folk through the legacy of colonialism, of course, because that's how sort of like well, Catholicism came to Southeast Asia in the first place, right? Um, but my family in and of itself is not we're not religious, but my grandparents, I guess, like are Taoist, like adjacent. So like I guess like I went into sort of this like very prim Catholic school with no sort of like misgivings about like sort of this emaciated white man God like figure that we were sort of being preached to regularly. And so it kind of became, I feel like the religious experience became like more of an aesthetic one for me. And I think it was like maybe also to be born and raised in Singapore is an exercise in duality in a different way than say like an Asian person growing up in the US. But it's also like it's very complex in its own way because like I guess like I mean so just for context, like Chinese people, which I am of Chinese origin, were the majority race in Singapore, so there wasn't that sense of I guess like alienation of being a minority race, and also because we were a British colony, English is like the lingua franca in Singapore. So that appears to be sort of like a like it flattens out sort of like the multicultural experience in some way. But then how do you say it? But I was a very like a I guess like a very disobedient student, I suppose, by Singaporean standards. Um, and okay, you know what? I feel like as in we need to hear partially from Olivier at this stage before like I go on because I feel like it needs to be relative because like what if like I don't know, what if Olivier's level of disobedience was more than mine? And then like I want to kind of like let it be like let's have a bounce. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, especially in the like in the different cultural context, right? Like di
Yeah,
diaspora, this like
totally.
fluid
Yeah.
dynamic thing. Olivier,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind also, sharing a little bit about where you grew up and what it was like for you.
Oh, yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Paris, and it was a quiet life actually because it's not Paris, the big city. And the most important for me, what I remember a lot of my childhood and my youth, it's maybe the countryside because I spent all my holidays in a old farm with my parents, and it was a very a nowhere place actually. So it like a little village, maybe 6 houses. So no electricity in the rooms. I spend my day in the field, in the river, or among the farm animals. I read a lot, and it's the first memories of my grow up actually, and it was very quiet. And about my mother, uh, who is Vietnamese. And when I was a child, I was mute. When I went to school, it was very funny because the teachers thought I don't speak French. They thought maybe my mother
Right.
just arrived from Vietnam. And when they saw my father, uh, who was a French guy,
Right.
white, they said, "What? Olivier is not a refugee or something like that?" No, just I was mute because I didn't want to speak.
Right.
Why did
But
you not want to speak?
I don't know. I was very little boy, and I was very, very quiet. Uh, and maybe it was like a joke for me. I don't remember. It's my mother who told me that, but it was, it's because when I was a child, I look more Vietnamese. I have my hair very
Right.
straight, and so even some actors a few years ago saw a picture of myself on a boat, and they project something about Vietnam, a sad child on a boat, maybe is a refugee, and say, no, I was born in France, actually. So my mother came from Saigon in the 50s, but not me. So,
Mm,
but nobody talked about that.
But it's so
I see.
fascinating because like you said that like it was the suburbs and it was really quiet. And like for me, it's the opposite where it was Singapore, it was so cosmopolitan, it was really noisy all
Mm,
the time. But I also like escaped into books. And do you feel that like for totally different reasons when you were reading a lot because it was the countryside, maybe there wasn't like sort of that much to do, it was an escape as well. Because like then it feels like as an it's an inevitable that as writers maybe we were looking for that escape even from childhood, and you could come from like two completely different contexts but still arrive at the same mode of escape.
Okay. Exactly,
mm.
yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the note you were making earlier too, Amanda, about like disobedience. I mean, it kind of leads into our next question, which is like, when did y'all first get in contact with like writing, creative arts, like literature? And when was there a moment where you knew this was like the path that you wanted to take, right? Like I think for me growing up, like having been born and raised in the United States to refugee parents, like I don't know if the arts or literature was always like the most obedient thing that I could have done as a young child, right? And so yeah, I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that. Like, do you remember your first contact with writing slash the creative work, creative arts? Um, Amanda.
Well, I mean for me it was so when I was 8 years old, I somehow thought that it was a great idea to sort of create like a erotica magazine. And so I did. It was a zine, and like I think I enterprisingly sold it to my friends for like the equivalent of like a quarter. And like it was quite popular in my school.
Mm,
And so I single-handedly sort of like churned out this content and the illustrations and put it together. So it was kind of like it was like a samizdat, and I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but like reflecting on it now, it's really interesting because like in Singapore, up till this day, I mean, from when I was a kid till now,
mm,
we have just the one national newspaper, and you're literally not allowed to, I mean, even if you were an incredibly credible sort of like journalistic team with like the like required funding, you would not be able to set up like a competing newspaper in Singapore because we have this thing called the Newspapers Act, which only allows our one national newspaper, which comes under sort of like a department that comes under basically the Ministry of Communications in Singapore,
Right.
which essentially means like no freedom of the press. And of course, like I did not know or think of all these things as an 8-year-old convent school girl, but I think it was really interesting that sort of my first artistic brush, like let's say, or like sort of act of like like independent publishing was like
Right.
that was the instinct. Do you know what I mean? Because like what can you know at 8? But like what did I imbibe from the environment that this was like sort of felt
It
good
just felt right.
to
Yeah,
do?
I felt
Yes,
you were in
yeah,
the
yeah,
right
yeah.
place. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm. Almost like, oh man, feels almost enlightening. I feel, like to be that
Yeah.
young. I mean, what the reception from your parents too. I mean, so 8 is pretty young. Like any doubts along the way?
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. So of course, as in I mean, yeah, sorry. I as in I forgot to so it was like I guess like sort of both my first act of like, I mean, and to me it wasn't an act of rebellion because I didn't see what was wrong with it. I just thought it
Right.
was like a great time, right? Like and obviously like my fellow schoolgirls thought it was great as well.
Mm.
And so this was all like fun and good until like I got caught by like a teacher. And then the teacher sort of like told my parents and everyone was horrified and I had to shut down my my like
Your hustle.
burgeoning media empire.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that it's interesting because like the first act of I guess like creativity and sort of like a push towards like self-expression was immediately followed by like the consequence of being punished. Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm. Olivier, do you have similar experiences?
No,
Were you
no,
ever punished for following the creative arts? Like when did you know
no,
this is the path you wanted to go to
no.
walk down?
My first contact of with creative art actually uh, was as a performer because I learned the piano and studied for years.
Mm.
So it's amazing to think about that with your question because when I said my childhood was very quiet, uh, the artistic path I chose first was the music. It's not language,
Mm,
so
mm,
it's amazing to think about that. So I learned piano since when I was 9 or 8 and study in the National Conservatory. That's why I work in Châtelet Theatre in Paris.
Mm.
But not really theater. Theater maybe I perform in school with some friends who create some sketches, some plays, but it was not really huge, just not even a hobby because I forgot it. I discovered really the theater as a teenager. Uh, the first play I saw was a, maybe a shock for me. I went for the first time to theater, and it was Shakespeare's King Lear.
Mm.
It was performed by a very famous French actress. The King was performed by this actress, Maria Casares. She is very famous in the history of French theater.
Yeah.
So it was my first experience of drama art, Shakespeare. So what else actually? Then I discovered opera, both actually. I saw a production of Péléas and Mélisande by Claude Debussy, staged by Peter Brook, the famous British director in the Bouffe du Nord in Paris. So it was the beginning of my desire of theater because
Mm.
it's the first place I remember I saw. Maybe I decided when I was a child to practice theater, but on the side, on the background as a director and as a playwright. But it was a very long way to do that, of course.
Can I ask, sorry, I'm just
No, go
curious, like because you started out with piano, right? How did that morph into sort of like being more for the stage and like being like a writer director then like because I feel like piano is like sort of a very different headspace as well because it's like from the performer to like sort of like the
Yes,
person like
I dislike to be on stage. So I was very anxious to practice with an audience. And I have, on the same period of this life of my youth, great friends who practice so amazing now. They are very famous artists. They perform in Carnegie Hall in New York or with the Philharmonia, New York Philharmonic. I have a great friend, violinist Sasha Soom, Alexandra Soom. She performed in Hollywood Bowl with Los Angeles Philharmonic, Tchaikovsky Concerto. So I said, I can do that. So now I can play piano. And the music is very important for me. I kept that from my 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 studying of music, but all my plays have some incidental music performed on stage, a string quartet, a clarinet, or maybe a singer with Johnny Cash songs for a show about Sylvia Plath, and on opera, of course. When I stage some opera, it's with music. So the music is very important for me, because I think music is also a universal language, of course, but it's another level for poetry. It's it's elsewhere, maybe.
Often when we have our guests on this show, a lot of them come from the United States or they're Asian American. And when we ask them, how did your family and your community receive your work? Oftentimes we get responses such as, well, my parents didn't really want me to become an artist. They wanted me to become a doctor or an engineer. I'm wondering if, Amanda, if that was, if that was true for you in Singapore, and what is the context in Singapore for someone who wants to be an artist? I think the Singaporean situation is quite unique, quite different from France, from the United States, and you yourself may not be considered a minority in Singapore, unlike some of the people we interview who would be minorities in the United States. So was it well received, your decision to become a writer, and how did your family and other Singaporeans react to your career?
well, I think unfortunately, like this like sort of like the Asian pragmatism is like regardless of like I guess like whether one is like in a minority or majority identity. So I think that like for Singapore, which is like a place that's built on kind of like an ethos of like sort of like regional exceptionalism, and we're always reminded that like sort of survival is key and sort of like practicality is very important. And there was like a big push for, I guess, like just all other sectors because like we're told constantly that we have no natural resources, and we're such a small island with neighbors who could like sort of like turn hostile at any moment. So like we have to focus very much on sort of like industries that like would allow us to economically thrive. And I think that our like founding prime minister famously said, poetry is a luxury that we cannot afford. And so like I think that like growing up in that climate, I guess like there wasn't even an understanding of the possibility of being an artist, you know? So it was maybe even less that it was disapproved of, but more of like what is going on or what would that even mean, or sort of like how would that possibly pan out, you know? Um, and even now, I think that like even after I had moved to New York, and like published like 2 novels in the US, like as in when I come back to Singapore now, if I talk to sort of like a regular Singaporean person and I say like I'm a writer, um, they always assume that that means that like I'm a journalist or a copywriter or some such thing. And if I clarify to say like I'm a fiction writer, like as in their eyes will just like go wide. Um, and so I think that it's sort of I guess like a frustrating position to be in, but at the same time, I think that from especially sort of younger people in the arts who have come after me, like I guess like I mean, and I'm 37 and according to them it's like sort of like the fact that like I exist sort of has allowed them to believe that like this pathway is possible. And so I think when you come from a relatively small place and sort of like with a relatively short history, I mean short in the sense of like I guess like I'm talking like post-independence Singapore, um it's crazy to think that like you're the one sort of like paving the way ahead, do you know what I mean, like for like not even for like a community per se, but like for the idea of like sort of like being a viable artist as a legitimate pathway for existing in this world. So yeah, I think about that.
And I understand the situation you're describing, but I'm also wondering, most nations are proud of their culture. You know, they want that this is a soft power, or just simply the idea that we need our arts and our literatures and our music and so on as proof of how valid and how worthy our culture is. So Singapore being actually, like you said, a very young nation, so why do you think that hasn't taken hold? I understand like the emphasis obviously on building the country's economy and all that, but you would also I would also imagine that people would say, well, this is Singaporean culture, you know, and maybe it's not
Yeah.
novels that we're invested in, but something, because Singapore is formed out of other cultures in which the idea of art is important.
Oh, absolutely, Viet. I think that this shift started maybe I would say like maybe about 10 years ago. So, and I think the thing about it is that the very systematic way in which like it has been it's being brought about is what is like a little bit disturbing to me. I think that was like a governmental paper called like the Renaissance City Plan. You know, and under which like I guess like now we have I guess like in the past 10 years definitely built up like a very strong arts infrastructure. So we have sort of like museums that didn't exist when I was growing up, film festivals that didn't exist when I was growing up. And there's definitely also like uh oh, I mean compared to the US, I guess like not so, I mean because Europe has like great arts funding as well. Um but Singapore has like actually really generous arts funding. It's just that like it's within certain guidelines. And I have a great fear of being sort of co-opted by the state for their purposes because like I think exactly as you say, um now that we have built up sort of like the I guess like sort of that economic base, we're definitely like looking towards like cultural soft power. Um, and in order to receive like arts funding, I feel that like a lot of artists in Singapore have kind of become so inured to the guidelines that they're not even guidelines on a piece of paper anymore. They're sort of like guidelines that have infiltrated um the headspace of Singaporean artists such that like the censorship is coming from within and maybe in like quite subtle ways. And so I think that this is like something um that I have to navigate within like sort of the context of being a Singaporean artist as well. And that's also like I guess like why I find some necessity and freedom in being in New York at the same time. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I've had the privilege of, being in Singapore a few times. I've loved it, but I can certainly feel the sense of conformity and political pressures or repression that takes place, and certainly the emphasis on commodities and materialism. But you have a great writers festival, and it was wonderful being there. But as an international writer, I think my place might have been different than a Singaporean writer. Now, Olivier, I've been to France several times, and the stereotype is that the French love their writers, that writers are very highly regarded. And I love that. I'm wondering if that was true for you growing up, though, because, you're certainly French, but you're also of a mixed race heritage, and that might have inflected your experiences differently. But I've always had the fantasy that it would be lovely to be a writer in France because everybody respects literature, and writers are so respected.
Yes, in France we have a very huge opinion about arts and literature and creative experience, but it's very hard. I think it's like the remains of something past, because we have in France so many writers, so many culture and patrimony. It's like it's a huge a legacy actually from the past. So when we say we are artists, everybody says, "Oh, great! You have a really great expectation, and your life is so amazing." No, because as an artist, we have to make some fundraising every day. So it's great, and there are many theaters, many libraries, many cultural art center, but it's not enough for support, actually, of course. So it's like the French Institute, actually. There are some places in the world for French culture, but there is no money. So it's a big problem. For my family to be an artist, as you said before, it's what? No, it's impossible. You have to study, you have to go to university. So it's it was another experience. I start very later to write and to make theater. I studied before in university. My father passed away when I was young, so maybe it was, the point in my life I decided to become an artist, to write, to make theater, because the theater for me is the place, the stage where the ghost could come. So it's to keep a connection with my past, maybe my father. So that's why for me, art is also a very sensitive and also very particular, especially for theater.
I'm also wondering some of the adversity or challenges to producing that art, and how that, especially in well, in places like Singapore, France, but Olivier, you produced an opera about the complexity of Vietnam's history within Vietnam, which, guests on our show previously, and perhaps Viet, you could talk a little bit about this. The sympathizer wasn't allowed to film in Vietnam and had to be filmed in Thailand. Was there any sense like are you able to speak about some of the censorship issues or strict guidelines that may have impacted the way in which you had to produce your opera? And Paysage dans l'oubli.
Yeah,
Like,
the English title of this opera is From an Oblivion Landscape. So it's the story of my grandmother and my mother when they left Saigon in 1958. My mother was a child. I decided to make this play, this opera, to be connected with my Vietnamese part. It was very late in my background, actually. I know there was this artistic residency in Ho Chi Minh City. So I make the application, and everybody in French Institute say to me, yes, your project is great, but be careful about the censure because it's very important here, so you can tell everything. Say, okay. And when we start the production of this opera, the year before the performances, where our partner was the Ho Chi Minh City Opera Orchestra, said to us, we don't have to speak about the war and about the history. I was very, I knew about that, but I said, it's impossible. There were 30 years of war, so we can't mute it. We have to speak about that. And I think artists and art have to ask about that, have to think about that. So I decided to write the libretto, and I decided to to write about civil people, not civilian, not soldiers, not military, because I thought it was impossible to have some political character on stage like Ho Chi Minh. Impossible. But even if I did that, everybody was scared about this project. The scare, of the censor, the scare of the censor. So we need an authorization to perform. We send the libretto to a committee, and they agree or not. And we add this authorization 2 days before the first performance. So during 4 weeks, we rehearsed with all the team, 25 people, without know if we could perform the opera. So it was it was a big anxiety. It was very hard for all the cast, all the team, because we worked, and everybody knew that we have to share a very important project because it was a story, an untold story. That's why there was a great pressure on the cast, on the musician, the artist, the singers, because they knew they're gonna share with people in Vietnam their story. And at the end, we performed it. I cut some stuff in the libretto. Some people said, you can say that, we can't have that on stage. So we need a happy ending. So I need to write a happy ending like in a Disney movie, And I said, how could I make a happy ending after 30 years of war, after napalm, after, all this death? But also I wrote a happy ending. It's cut now in the new version of the opera, of course. But so it was really crazy. And when the censor committee came for the first performance, everybody's scared. And one Vietnamese guy who worked in French Institute said to me, it's an amazing play, it's beautiful, but you speak only about exile, war, history, memory, lost. We're all gonna be in jail. so I say, oh my God. But the committee was very nice, and it was a good committee because I think there was a political pressure on it too, even from Vietnamese people. And it was, the committee was historians, teacher from University of Saigon. So they knew the history. So we could perform, we performed it, and it was screened for the TV, and it was maybe 3 times on national television in Vietnam after. So I said, what?
One thing that I think, I have in common with both of you, Olivier and Amanda, is that in some circumstances, we were both outsiders. Amanda has gone to the United States and then she's come back, presumably as a changed person. Olivier, you may or may not fit in France, but when you go to Vietnam, you're certainly not Vietnamese. So Olivier, just before we move on to Amanda, I'm curious, when you go to Vietnam or when you went to Vietnam, how were you received? Did people treat you as a Vietnamese person, or do they think that you've been so far removed from Vietnam that you're effectively a complete outsider, or were you somewhere in between?
Uh, then when I was in Vietnam, everybody knows my family is Vietnamese. So there is, but everybody said I'm a French artist too. So it's a mixed, I think. And that's why it was possible, I think, to make this on stage because I am a French artist. Because Vietnamese do not speak about that on stage. It's impossible. And at the end of the first performance, people were crying and they hugged my mother. And it was really amazing because we understood that it's also their stories. And it was the most beautiful thing I shared with these people. Because in the audience, everybody was Vietnamese. Maybe, 30 French people from French Institute or French high school, some expat, but everybody, all the audience was Vietnamese. So, and we understood that they needed that because it was a contemporary opera in French, so lasting 3 hours. So it's very hard for normal people, especially in Vietnam, because it's Occidental art opera. It's not Oriental art. But they went, and the press review was amazing too, and I was very sensitive about that because they said how French artists could make Vietnam so beautiful on stage with poetry and with history, and it's a it's a real connection now with this country because we make this show actually.
Amanda, what about you? Are you out of place wherever you happen to be, whether it's Singapore or New York City?
I think that like what you described yet about being like sort of simultaneously an insider and an outsider at the same time rings so true. So I often feel like I'm half in, half out, and sometimes I feel like an observer, and other times I feel like sort of like an instigator. But I think that also that friction in our identities is what leads us to create sort of like the works that we do, right? Um, I mean, of course, like think of someone like the captain, like that duality, like as in it must have been something that existed like in you, and I guess like in me, um, this time maybe like sort of like that binary as well as like all its nuances maybe have come to surface in Sister Snake, where there are sort of like this pair of like immortal sisters that seem to be diametrically opposite in personality. Oh, sorry, just for context, like my latest book, Sister Snake, which came out in December, and I was touring in Asia just earlier this year, um, is well, it's based on like an ancient Chinese myth about snake legends, which also interestingly, I realized, I mean, because like this is a diasporic context, I thought I would bring it up that like, so like the snake myth, or the myth of animal spirits, I guess exists syncretically across quite a number of like regional cultures. And so like I think that because it had come to me as like when I was like a young child, learning of like I guess like sort of folk tales and legends. So I had assumed that it was like a Chinese myth, but I realized that it exists in Indonesian, Indian, Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean subcultures. I mean not subcultures, like folk tale cultures. But so like the story is based on like a pair of sisters who are snake spirits. But I have transposed them sort of to a modern world where one of them, this like bohemian sugar baby green snake character lives in New York, whereas like sort of the more button up sort of trad wife character lives as like a politician's wife in Singapore. And I think it was really fun to sort of like maybe use like the binaries or oppositions I feel within my own identities when I move between spaces to also sort of like feed into these very what appear to be like sort of polar opposite characters at first in also like sort of polar opposite cities. But then I think that as I was writing the novel more, it also gave me sort of a much more nuanced understanding of what appeared to be sort of these more push-pull binaries in my own life. So I think that it's really fascinating as well how like sort of like our life bleeds into our art, bleeds back into our own life, you know?
Oh yeah, the snake is a trickster figure. It's a figure that's got deep significance in various kinds of religions and folklores. I guess it is very suitable for queer figures as well. Do you mind reading for us a little bit from Sister Snake?
Yeah, okay, just a teeny tiny bit. Okay.
Coincidentally, it's also like the year of the snake this year, right?
It
So
is, and
The
like
wood
so
snake.
yeah,
the wood
yes,
snake, yeah.
exactly, yeah. And it's actually the wood snake is somehow represented by the color green. So it is the year of the green snake, and people were asking me if I had timed it as such, and I was like, I wish, but yeah, I think it all works out. Okay, I'll just read like a tiny para. So this is from where, well, I mean, so the sisters like they are I mean, when you're immortal, I guess like with this, I also wanted to kind of capture the idea of like, for because like a lot of like I guess like familial relationships can also be the love can be very toxic as well because like we're kind of choosing to care for each other in the ways in which we think they want to be cared for, but oftentimes it's also like a projection, right? So like these sisters haven't seen each other in decades because like I guess like time is more fluid when you're an immortal. So just for context, this is like they haven't seen each other in about maybe 80 years, and one sister is encountering the other in New York for the first time. Okay. Union Pool is just 2 subway stops away, but it's 8:40 p.m. by the time Emerald gets there. She gets carted at the door. She has forgotten to bring her fake ID. Trust me, she teases the bouncer. I'm a fossil. She passes the dinky dance floor to the garden patio with the taco truck, where mismatched tables and chairs are laid out under fairy lights. Emerald catches a note of that floral lightness, Sue's jasmine scent, before she sees her. Following her nose, she spots Sue from the back. There she is, in a corner. Sue's hair is in a neat low chignon. She is dressed in a cream tweed jacket with a matching skirt, carrying one of her expensive bags, nursing a glass of sparkling water. The slender nape of her neck is lily white. Emerald's heart is pounding as she watches her sister from across the yard. How long has it been? Sometimes, when she hasn't seen Sue for decades, Emerald tells herself that the only thing still binding them together is their secret. Rather than any real currency of feeling, it is the empty immensity of their history that keeps them together. But every time she lays eyes on Sue again, she is jolted by an inevitability so sharp it makes her wince. This is her person across time and space. Okay, I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Olivier, I think you're going to read something for us in French and with a little translation afterwards.
Yes, it's a part of the libretto, the opera libretto, who is now a play, will be performed next month in Paris, and it's the part of my mom. And this story about Vietnamese legacy, Vietnamese memory, it's very silent in my family. Nobody speak about that. So it's a quiz maybe or a research I make. And when my mother saw the performance on stage, when I imagine some scenes where she talks with her father, she was very moved deeply actually because these scenes did not exist on reality. But that's why theater could make some reparation for myself. So it's because when she arrived in France, when she was 4 and her brothers 9, 8, the father disappeared and my grandmother was sick and she went to the sanatorium during 4 years. All the children were in French families separately. That's why they lost their language. And it's the most important loss, I think, the language, the Vietnamese language in my family. So this scene in French first. Éparpillées sur d'autres continents, toutes les familles se sont morcelées. J'ai oublié mon enfance ici et là-bas. L'une était un rêve et l'autre un effroi. Le seul moment où j'ai été heureuse, quand maman était au sanatorium, c'est lorsque nous étions au camp militaire près de Grenoble, un camp qui s'appelait Blanche-Neige. La montagne entière était le cercueil de verre, où passaient les ciels et les saisons, où chaque matin je hissais le drapeau au son d'une trompette. Nous étions tous égaux dans le camp militaire. Je n'étais pas différente. Je n'étais pas d'Asie ni d'Extrême-Orient l'enfant réfugié, ni la fille de déserteur et de l'exilé, ni la nièce du traître et du fusillé, un simple matricule sur un dossier. Seul vestige qui flottait encore sous le drapeau et dans le glas du clairon, la peau mate, les yeux bridés, les cheveux noirs. Plus tard, à Fontainebleau, réunis malgré la perdition, on s'habillait parfois avec les aosaï, nos reliques de la vie d'avant, puis on ne les a mis que pour les fêtes ou pour le carnaval. C'était trop différent. Alors on les a pliés et rangés dans les armoires. C'est comme ça qu'on a enterré le pays, en bouclant nos cheveux étouffés dans la laine d'un caban. So the English version. Scattered across other continents, all the families broke up. I forgot my childhood here and there. One was a dream and the other a terror. The only time I was happy, when Mom was in the sanatorium, was when we were in the military camp near Grenoble, a camp called Snow White. The whole mountain was the glass coffin, where the skies and the seasons passed, where every morning I raised the flag to the sound of the trumpet. We were all equal in the military camp. I was no different. I was not from Asia, not from the Far East, the refugee child, nor the daughter of a deserter on the exile, nor the niece of the traitor on the shot man. A simple number on a file. The only vestige that still floated under the flag and in the bell of the bugle. Olive skin, slanted eyes, black hair. Later in Fontainebleau, united despite the perdition, we sometimes dress in the outside or relics of the life before. Then we only wore them for parties or for carnival. It was too different. So we folded them and put them away in the cupboard. That's how we buried the country, by curling her hair, smothered in the wool of a peacoat.
Thank you so much, Olivier and Amanda, for sharing excerpts from your work. I mean, feeling it, you know, very deeply in the soul. I think it speaks to the breadth of the diaspora and how much we've been able to come from struggle and strife. I want to ask you, Olivier. I mean, this year is significant as it's the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, the loss of a country or the liberation of one, depending on the perspective. You're about to begin rehearsals for your next project, a play that's called A Vietnamese Part or A Vietnamese Score in March. Performances are set at the Asian Art National Museum in Paris from the 5th and the 9th of April, which is also sometimes colloquially referred to as Black April. Could you tell us a little bit more about this project?
It will be the first performance of the play, and it's great to have a whole Vietnamese cast on stage. Some all the artists are from Viet Cues, children. So I was very scared about this sharing because it's not the same story. Everybody has a different story. But people are in France. There is a camp in the south of France where people from Indochina were stayed long years. So I was scared about that to share my story with them, but everybody is so moved actually by this silent story. They need to share with people my stories, their memories, and it will be so great to perform in the National Asian Art Museum, because it's where the culture is staged, some sculpture from Cambodia, some mask from Japan, and also some piece of art from Vietnam. But it's a great opportunity to tell the story because no one knows about it in France. It's not a study in school, Vietnam War, French War, Indochina War, or Vietnam history. So it's mute.
Thank you for that, Olivier. And your work speaking to this historical erasure or amnesia on this official level, right? Really speaks and hopefully will inspire the folks listening here on Zoom and on the podcast on Spotify and Apple Music about a week after this we're recording the show, to motivate them to shape what the next 50 years will look like. Amanda, I mean, you've lived in New York, in Beijing, Berlin, Bangkok. In addition to like being born and raised in Singapore, I want to ask you about what's it feel like to return home? Because I think you're in Singapore right now. Like, what is your experience when you go back to visit? And then as a creative person, like what does it feel like? Yeah, what does it feel like in Singapore? And perhaps like even for creative folks who are grappling with, breaking through in the arts, what advice would you hope to give to them?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I'm not the best with advice, I think, but I guess like Singapore is like a place of like extreme contradictions, but I do think that like the as long as you spend enough time in like any one place, like as in it comes to be such as well. So I think that like, it's hyper modern, but it's also still really conservative in other ways, and it's globally connected, but also so insular in its mindset. And so I think that like the pressure to conform is real and still exists, but so is like this sense of like quiet resistance. And I think that like sort of art definitely is a way to connect back to like that side of yourself. And so I think that the subcultures it's hard to find like subcultures here, but like I'm beginning to see sort of like more of that, but maybe sort of within more like queer rave subculture contexts. And I guess like that's always like sort of a place to begin. I mean, and that has been true of like I guess like every city I've lived in as well. I guess and that's where I normally like sort of the starting point for me to kind of like dip my toes into subcultures within. Yeah. So I think that for artists, I mean anywhere, right? Because like as in and also like, you know, you can live in a place that putatively feels free and still you can still feel like incredibly trapped by your own circumstances or sort of like, you know, whatever you're hearing in your own head. So I feel that like that conversation within oneself is about like connecting back to your authenticity. And I think that this is like regardless of like whether you are a person in the arts or not. Because like there's so many ways in which like you can and should show up for like your authentic self, no matter sort of like what you do for a living or sort of like what your passions and interests are. So I think like I'm a huge advocate for sort of like being able to hear yourself and then sort of like thinking about just like the smallest, most banal ways in which like it feels good to express yourself. It doesn't have to be like, do you know what I mean? Like as in putting on like a great play or publishing a book or anything like that. I think I've been increasingly thinking about sort of like really like a lot more sort of micro but grounded gestures and rituals that like everyone can find and practice in their own lives to sort of reconnect back to that sense of authenticity and autonomy. Yeah.
So before we get to our last question, Amanda, queer raves, how does that exist in Singapore? Just out of curiosity, I just assumed not somebody that's conformist, but I just assumed there was just no drugs in Singapore.
Oh, true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I think that we generally, well, I was going to say that we generally rave without sort of hard drugs, for sure. But that kind of like, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it like the fact that it takes sort of like more effort to kind of get into a level of like highness kind of makes you more bonded in that experience together because like you are getting there based off of vibes. I mean, like alcohol and vibes. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think that like the lack of like illicit substances, counterintuitively, you having to work harder for it, makes you more bonded. I don't know if this makes sense, but this is like what I'm telling myself right now.
Awesome. Organic raves.
Yeah.
Absolutely the way that we should
Vibes
go.
only.
Oh,
No
yeah.
illicit
Yeah.
substances. Only good
Yeah.
vibes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question of the night is something that I've asked everybody in the audience. What is your favorite Vietnamese food? But
Ooh.
Amanda, I will have to say, you know, I spent 3 months in Singapore, and I did get to sample some of the great Singaporean food. And Singapore has a reputation that everybody just loves to eat, which seemed to
So
be true.
what is your favorite Singapore food?
That's what I was going to get to.
Yes, please.
Laksa.
Oh
Laksa.
my gosh, I love
Soupy
laksa
noodles.
too. Yes,
So that is
yeah.
my favorite Singaporean food. It was actually a pretty hard decision to make given the, you know, the awesome diversity of Singaporean food. I did not try to eat any Vietnamese food when I was in Singapore, so I have no idea if it's any good or not, but I assume you've had your chances to eat some
Yep,
Vietnamese food. What is your favorite
absolutely.
Vietnamese dish?
It's what's it called? Banh bo sao? Like the is that what it's called? I feel like I'm butchering sort of like the pronunciation, but it's like the it's really healthy. It's like the noodle salad with the beef and like the veggies on the side actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay, wait,
Bò
can you
xào,
say
bò
it?
xào.
Bò
Bò
sao.
xào,
Okay.
right? Bò is
Bò
beef,
sao.
xào
Yes.
is the stir fry.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Philip, what is your favorite Vietnamese
I'm
food?
broken rice plates. Gum tấm.
Gum
Yeah.
dum? Yeah,
Ooh.
It's
absolutely.
like, you know, modular.
Modular. Okay. DJ Puzzle has chipped in. I believe he said, well, he's from New Orleans, so he had a different take on things. It was like po' boys And then Annika was saying it's bánh cuốn, which is also an awesome Vietnamese dish. Oh, okay. Olivier, you're going to have the last word. What is your favorite Vietnamese dish?
Ben Kung Tu and Bún Chả.
2 votes for bánh cuốn and bún chả. Terrific. Thank you so much. It's been great having you both here to compare your very different experiences in France, in Singapore. I'm sure all of our audience is now like, when are we going to get the chance to go to both of these amazing places? Thanks so much for sharing your life stories, your art, your experiences, and your insights. And thanks to you, Philip, for co-hosting with me. Thanks to Annika for producing, and thanks to DJ Puzzle, who's going to lead us out.